If you consider yourself a Half-Life fan, you are most likely aware of Black Mesa, the Half-Life 1 remake. But how did it come to be? Did it succeed in its goal of remaking such a classic that is Half-Life 1? And why is Black Mesa Zen so highly regarded? We'll be taking a look at the fan-made, mod-turned-retail game's history and review it. And don't worry, this video is also for people who have never heard of Black Mesa before. Half-Life 1 is one of the most successful games of all time. It did release in 1998 though, which means its graphics are dated and have been dated for about 20 years now. Though revolutionary at the time, the looks simply don't hold up these days. Once the Source engine released alongside Half-Life 2, the game was ported to Source in Half-Life Source. This port is notoriously awful, and the game basically looked the exact same except for new water textures. In 2004, there were two projects that were aiming to remaster the Source port, which both started off with the plan to simply update some models, textures, and make everything look a bit more polished. At this point, it was still supposed to be a simple remaster. These two groups united shortly afterwards after realizing they are trying to do the same thing, at which point the project quickly grew in ambition. The first release of the team was in 2012, Black Mesa Source, which did exactly what they aimed for. After spending a couple years as a mod from the year 2012 to 2015, it got greenlit on Steam Greenlight, which used to be a page for games to be accepted into the Steam store. Valve approached them and wanted to sell Black Mesa on Steam. It eventually released on Steam as a retail product in 2015, now dropping the Source and simply being called Black Mesa. It was also at this point that the company Crowbar Collective was officially created, which is now a household name in the Half-Life community. I want to go back and take a look at the mod version of Black Mesa, how the game used to look in its early stages and what significant changes were made come the Steam version. Even at the time of the mod version, this mod was already a remake rather than a remaster. What is the difference, you might ask? Well, a remaster takes a game and improves upon it, most of the time only the graphical aspect. A remake is what you get in the case of Black Mesa. It still takes into account the original and uses it as a guideline, but the game is actually completely rebuilt from the ground up. Sure, they might have copy-pasted some elements or brushes from Half-Life Source, but you won't see anything left of that in the final release. And you also won't see it in the mod version. I remember first playing this and being left astonished with the capabilities of the Source engine. It was so inspiring to see what a group of modders were able to achieve without expecting any payment. Which, to be fair, they should have charged money for this. Despite it being released now on Steam for a cheap $50, you can still download this mod version, which is great in case you lack the funds. But I'll tell you the main differences now and why this can't really be considered that much of a replacement for the retail one. Now, to start off, the mod version of Black Mesa looks incredible already. Everything got a straight upgrade and actually looked better than very most Source games released at the time. Today, it does look noteworthily worse though than the retail version, which is for one to be expected but also surprising considering how great it already looks at the mod version. Be it the levels, effects or weapons, the retail version managed to improve upon every single aspect graphically as well as gameplay-wise. You might also notice some differences in the pacing, the severely shorter version of Surface Tension and On a Rail, not only when compared to the retail game we eventually got, but also to Half-Life 1. There is a reason as to how this happened. Unlike On a Rail, which was simply cut due to it being one of the most hated chapters of Half-Life 1, Surface Tension used to be a lot shorter because the main level designer for that chapter left the team suddenly and unexpectedly, which is why it used to be a lot shorter. It has since been extended in the retail version and is now a lot longer than that of Half-Life 1. On a Rail can also be added on as an official mod in the retail game, thanks to its workshop. There is however one topic left up for discussion, the topic that used to be the most controversial one of Half-Life 1, later becoming the most controversial topic of Black Mesa, that topic being Zen. In the mod version of Black Mesa, the game ended right when you entered the portal at Lambda Core, which is of course, as we know, where the Zen chapter would have started. The Black Mesa team decided to not add Zen for the time being, for a multitude of reasons. One being that they were a newly found team and were all basically still in the early learning phase of game design. A big portion of the team either just finished high school or was currently in college, and were all doing it in their free time. Pursuing Zen would not only have required the rethinking those chapters and actually making them enjoyable, which they certainly weren't in Half-Life 1, but also making them look good. It is really hard to make Zen look good in any way. Some Source mods have tried in the past, but it always ends in an ugly mess. Zen was also missing from the retail version back when it released in 2015, but later got added in 2020 in version 1.0, the final release of Black Mesa, which was 16 years after development began, meaning that this is the longest time any developers have been working on a Half-Life game ever. So to give a final comparison between the mod and the retail version, the retail one has a lot more polished, better looking level design and a lot more things done with the Source engine. When Zen released in 2020, they were given a more modern version of the Source engine by Valve, which included a lot of new technologies that actually made a lot of things seen in Zen possible in the first place. This includes things like awesome looking god rays and cascade lighting, meaning real-time dynamic shadows that affect other dynamic objects. So let's leave the mod version behind and talk about Black Mesa versus Half-Life 1. What things were changed? We're gonna be leaving graphics aside as that is obvious, and I've mostly explained it now. We're gonna dive into level design, enemies and their AI, weapons and sound design including music, and finally, Zen, which is more than deserving of a topic of its own. It also takes up most of the script. For level design, there is absolutely nothing to complain about. Quite possibly the strongest aspect of this remake. On a Rail was cut a lot shorter. A lot more levels were added in other places though. I think Surface Tension is the best example for this, featuring some great extended maps. There is this funny quirk I found with the airstrike though, where you can just spam fire airstrikes. Literally no cooldown. Another great change is the fact that the sky is filling more and more with smoke throughout the levels, greatly showcasing the fact that the battle is expanding and turning more destructive by the second. They also nicely showcase the Xenian forces winning the upper hand in these extended areas, which you never really figured out while playing Half-Life 1. But to be honest, I never really get a game story first time playing. I'm just here for shooty, for dopamine, for the funsies. Some layouts were also changed a bit across all the chapters, my favorite being the beginning labs having a lot more rooms to explore. I can't possibly list all of them, but oftentimes places are barely recognizable because of how much they were extended. It's really refreshing and is great for people that have played Half-Life 1 more times than they can count. Also, I must say I really enjoyed the on a rail mod version of Black Mesa. I'd recommend everyone to install it for their first playthrough. It's thankfully really easy due to Black Mesa having workshop support, which is great in general. It allows for custom campaigns, weapons, sounds and whatever you want basically. To speak on enemies and their AI, Half-Life 1 was revolutionary for their great work in AI. Definitely consider checking out Mafitimus Blackimus series on Half-Life X, where they cover a lot of the NPC's AIs and their unique interactions. It's honestly incredible how detailed they are. So for Black Mesa they try to do the same. Most importantly, I'd like to speak on the HECU, which started out as command soldiers in development. The big difference you might have noticed but never been able to pinpoint between the soldiers of Half-Life 1 and Black Mesa is the fact that the Black Mesa soldiers can shoot while they are running, a feature command soldiers also had. They are of course not the exact same as command soldiers. They for example use grenades to lure you out of cover. Generally, the AI in Black Mesa is great. The enemies are for the most part the same as in Half-Life 1, except for a few in Zen, which we'll get to in the Zen category. Now, here might be my first kinda negative point. Well, that might be a bit harsh actually. The weapons looks-wise are great and are incredibly well balanced. Half-Life 1, depending on your playstyle, was probably just a shotgun or MP5 galore. There wasn't a need mostly to use anything other than those two. Obviously, for underwater segments you'd have to resort to using the Glock or crossbow, but otherwise, the huge ammo capacity for the shotgun and MP5 were way too gigantic for you to ever be forced to use anything different. I think in Black Mesa the shotgun and MP5 mostly still triumph most other weapons. The ammo for both has been significantly nerfed though. The MP5 has had its mag and ammo capacity reduced from 50 and 250 to 30 and 150 respectively. Also, the secondary fire grenades have been reduced from 10 to 3 maximum, which is a huge change. Other weapons have received buffs in turn, like the trip mines being increased from 5 to 6. Hell yeah. I also really appreciate the buff to Snugs. Compared to Half-Life 1 where you basically just throw them right in front of your feet, in Black Mesa you yeet them like 40 feet, which was exactly the buff they needed. I think that of all my times using the Snugs in Half-Life 1, they ended up literally only damaging me in about 80% of the cases. Whereas in Black Mesa it's more like 75%? Nah, just kidding. They are pretty decent in Black Mesa thanks to this buff. Generally speaking, you'll find yourself using a lot more of the huge weapon arsenal that you received than what you would have been using in Half-Life 1. Be it because another weapon was buffed, or because your favorite weapons run out of ammo more frequently, forcing you to use others. Both are great for balancing. I do have a bit of a complaint though, as I've mentioned, and it kinda mixes with the sound design point. The sound design in Black Mesa is wonderful. It's so flawless and immersing for like 99% of the time. And don't even get me started on the soundtrack, because holy hell. I do have a minor complaint when it comes to the weapons though, because I generally must say the weapon sounds are a bit lacking. I feel that the sounds miss a punch. One that Half-Life 1 definitely mastered. Look at how juicy the Glock sounds are in Half-Life 1 compared to those of Black Mesa. I think the shotgun is the biggest offender in this. It's hard to put it to exact words as someone who never really did a lot of sound design. But generally, I think the weapons kinda sound like they are made out of paper or plastic. They sound so airy, if that makes sense. They are missing that big bang you would expect from a massive shotgun like this. Adding some sort of punchy sound right at the start of the firing sound would suffice in this. In the current state, which is probably the final state, the weapon sounds feel a little less powerful than they should. Thankfully, of course, the developers were nice enough to include a workshop, which means this is barely a problem. I can simply download a different sound pack.
Do you suck dick? Do you suck dick? Do you suck?
Aside from the weapons though, the sound design is great, and there is a funny anecdote from the person who designed the sounds and music for Black Mesa, Joel Nielsen. He said that in order to design some of the footstep sound for the flashy areas of Zen, he used the sound of a light open-handed slap of a wet butt cheek, specifically the butt of his wife. There is nothing that shows a love for the craft of sound design more than lightly tapping your wife's wet butt for footstep sounds. I salute you, Joel Nielsen. Speaking of Zen, let's get into it. Zen released a total of 16 years after development began and was basically as big of a release as Half-Life 3 would be in the Half-Life community. The people were waiting for a long time and the hype was more than justified. They pushed the Source engine to its absolute limits. I mean, look at all this. We're gonna be taking a bit more of an in-depth look into Zen, simply because it was changed that much. I mean, look at how long this video is still going, goddamn. The original Zen in Half-Life 1 lasts for like an hour or two tops. In Black Mesa, it basically makes up half of the game. There are a lot of things to praise and also quite a few things to unpraise here. Immediate positive thing to note, you immediately get shown your goal. The big red portal is the first thing you'll put your eye on coming out of the cave you were teleported into. It stays that way for the entirety of the Zen chapter, basically accomplishing what the Citadel did in Half-Life 2, acting as your compass and an indicator for how far you've come, basically always visible wherever you are in the world. You will generally see a lot of mirroring of Half-Life's game design principles, which of course makes sense given it's a Half-Life game. But how exactly they managed to execute these tactics so well is credited to the book Raising the Bar, a book by Valve about how they made Half-Life 2, which I can only recommend by the way for anyone that is in any way, shape or form into game designing themselves. They immediately use the typical Valve level design principle of teaching things to the player once you enter Zen, this time teaching you the long jump. Thankfully, they added the option to double press jump instead of the weird jump crouch pressing thing we're used to from Half-Life 1. You're first teach the long jump in a safe way, where you drop down to a pool of water and you can retry the jump if you failed. Then you try it with a bit more stakes at hand, while still landing in a healing pool in case you did take damage, which also teaches you the mechanic of healing pools at the same time. Then you use it with quite the risky jumps, the perfect way to teach the player something without directly telling them, all using the level design. Another great feature are the newly added landing jets, which save you quite a lot of damage you would have taken otherwise. I remember dying a ton to the platforming in Half-Life 1. The long jump module truly is incredibly fun on Black Mesa. I was quite sad we didn't get to pick up this harpoon gun though. We then enter our first different biome, as I'd call it. After being introduced to the long jump module, we come across this research station. Research stations were implied in Half-Life Blue Shift, for example, but never did they look as good as they do here. A real great decision of them. They also added HEV suit zombies here, which are a great enemy that was actually seen in Entropy 02 as well, using the Zen relay grenades. We get introduced into a couple new mechanics, like these weird Zen cables. These things that hang from the ceiling that shoot at you, and these crystals that charge your armor. We also find some small Zen crystal digging sites, which is pretty cool. I generally enjoy these additions. Zen is kind of split into biomes, as I mentioned. After we get done with the introductory area, which I'd call a rocky biome, we transition into a swamp-like biome. It's filled with tons of plants and is generally untouched by humans. No Zen crystal mining here. The first few areas of Zen are filled to the brim with hound eyes, which did feel a little monotonous. Black Mesa tries to combat this by introducing two new hound eye variations. For one, there are smaller explosive ones. These run at you and explode. I think these are a cool concept, but can be hard to fight. Then there is a bigger version of hound eyes, which get introduced a little later in the Zen chapter. I think the main difference is slightly more health and a quicker explosion. While I like the variety, it did still feel a little monotonous. Some more bull squids could have fit nicely here, but I'm not trying to bash too much. Generally, these levels look and play really well. Though I do question this random tunnel in the middle of Zen filled to the brim with mines. Who would want to trap this place? I get that it's used in a way to introduce these explosive plants though. We then approach what I call the Tree of Life. Not the most creative name, but it does fit pretty well. We have to open a tunnel by going down 3 different paths and uncovering the leaves blocking this tunnel layer by layer. Generally pretty fun. Though you will find this enable things at 3 different points objective to get pretty annoying rather quickly. For now, we jump and hop around Zen and admire the beautiful atmosphere, our goal looming over our head the entire time. We also get introduced a new enemy, underwater barnacles, which are creative and annoying, just like the normal barnacles. We then do this puzzle to open a portal which reminded me a lot of the Citadel core puzzle of episode 1. Generally, this puzzle is fine and well designed. It does feel very similar to the puzzle at the Tree of Life though. After we solve this puzzle, we teleport right into Gornak's lair. The Gornak fight is in my opinion the biggest improvement from the original Zen. The Gornak in Half-Life 1 is just so anticlimactic. It's kinda just shooty until dead. The thing I personally liked about the Gornak fight is the fact that the arena of it changes, that it runs away and you chase it, only to then be trapped beneath it at the end. It's a pretty dynamic fight, which is definitely the highlight of it. Black Mesa took that concept and expanded on it tenfold. First of all, this beginning area is absolutely beautiful. The orange tone is awesome. They also use a great tactic as to introduce the arena, where you have to press 3 buttons spread around the place, which forces you to learn the layout. You also get some supplies teleported in from the Lambda team back on Earth, which is pretty cool and makes you feel just a little less alone and a bit cared for. Once you enable all 3 buttons and start up a teleporter that is supposed to take you up to the final teleport, you get interrupted by the Gornak. You are unable to move as it rushes towards you. You will need to use the long jump module a lot here, which now has sideways jumping. This fight is actually pretty hard and you will need to fire absolutely everything you got at it. The Gornak dynamically destroys the arena, which is so cool. Once you do enough damage, it will run away. Once you chase after it, you will find yourself get trapped deeper and deeper in its lair. at which point it switches again and you become the prey once more. The fight is greater than it ever has been before. You will solve a few puzzles in between, which I did feel were a little much at times, but it generally is fine. Once you reach the final area, you are able to do one of three things. For one, you are able to just kill it normally. The other option is running away, which can totally be done. I must say killing it did feel pretty bad, since you are invading its habitat and killing its babies. The other option is to skip the last fight but still kill it. You see, in the beginning of Zen, you can find cyanogen. If you manage to somehow take it with you until the end, you can plug it in and gas the place. It even has an achievement tied to it. This footage is not recorded by me though, because hell no, I'm not doing that. Shout out to Just Chill for the footage. We then start the Interloper chapter, which immediately does one thing right that Half-Life 1 didn't manage to do, which is introducing the Vortigons as passives. I don't think many people noticed on their first playthrough that the Vortigons in Interloper are passive. In Black Mesa, we first get to hear Vortigons being beaten up by the alien grunts, followed by seeing them get beaten up, which makes us feel bad for them and fight the alien grunts first, which is when we notice that the Vortigons aren't fighting us. I also really like this village setting. It shows us how the Vortigons would have lived, wouldn't it have been for the Nihilants enslaving them. We also get to see alien controllers taking over their mind, forcing them to attack us, which gets the player to rather attack the controllers than the Vortigons. We later get into a Gargantua chase, which I thought was fun. Gargantuas were pretty underused in Half-Life 1, and here we get to see like a dozen of them at once, and this awesome view we get once we do outrun them. I really like this part. I must say though that Interloper did fail to get a lot better than that of Half-Life 1. While it did basically fully rework the entire chapter, it kinda looks meh mostly. It looks detailed and consistent, but simply not that pleasant to the eye or interesting. Obviously still a massive improvement from Half-Life 1. What it did not improve from the Half-Life 1 version though is the gameplay, because this chapter is just tedious. It's just big puzzles that involve you running back and forth and plugging in cables over and over and over and over again for like a solid 30 minutes. You do unlock the supercharging gluon gun here for the first time, which makes your weapon glow green and has its impact appear green, but not the beam, which I think is an immense missed opportunity. After this you move into the alien run factory, which was more fun. I can't shake the feeling though that a lot of this simply feels like a Garry's Mod Death Run map, both looks and gameplay wise. You might also notice how Zen got progressively less friendly looking. The beginning was a lot of round shapes like leaves and stuff, then it got a bit rougher with the crystals everywhere and eventually it was all just jagged spikes. A really cool small detail that definitely does work on your subconsciousness. Interloper sadly just keeps going, it gets so tiring. The levels themselves are good but you just get so tired of it. Platforming up some factory isn't fun anymore after you've done it like 10 times. Eventually we arrive at this elevator, which supercharges your gluon gun and spams a ton of alien controllers at you. If any area felt like a Garry's Mod map, it was this part. I think a lot of people enjoy this part, which obviously is great, I'm happy for them. I personally think it's kinda frustrating. It's cool to be so overpowered, but I think it could have been better executed. It's a level design that's kinda uninspired, and simply aiming a death beam at flying bolts seems more like a CSGO aim training map than anything else. Once we do arrive at the top, we finally reach the big portal. This area looks great. The Nihilan fight was just in dire of a need of a redesign as the rest of Zen. The fight in Half-Life 1 is of course a classic and legendary fight, and it featured a lot of variation. Shooting at it with all you got is great, but it did kinda fail to be fun? The constant teleporting was irritating if anything, and having to constantly platform back to the fight felt unmotivated. Having to cheese mechanics in order to not just have the boss fight be delayed isn't great. Jumping around and shooting into its head was fun, until you were goddamn teleported again. Black Mesa majorly changed the fight, in my opinion for the better by a mile. Instead of dodging some small traveling projectiles and teleports, you now have to dodge the Nihilan teleporting in objects from Earth and throwing them at you, which is just so cool. Which is of course not its only attack. It also has some fiery rain and it's able to split the arena, but these attacks all come with an indicator of where they are about to hit, which makes them pretty fair. Once it gets desperate enough, it actually starts throwing parts of buildings at you, in which you find resources like health and ammo to recharge a bit. Is it that realistic for each building section it throws at you to include so many supplies? Hell no. But it's awesome and fun, so who cares? The only thing I criticize is the look of the Nihilan here. To give you a bit of background as to why I hold this opinion, canonically, the Nihilan fled to Zen after his world was invaded by the Combine. Yes, the Combine even had a significance in the Half-Life 1 story. I think in Half-Life 1 they managed to make the Nihilan look like the only survivor of a species. It looks a lot more bruised and beaten and operated on by the Combine. It looks ugly, which is great. I'm not sure if this might actually just be due to the old graphics of Half-Life 1. Perhaps this is just simply unrecreatable in modern graphics. In Black Mesa it looks a lot more smooth, like it has a Snapchat filter enabled or something. They both look great in their own right. Black Mesa's one simply looks a little less fitting to the occasion. But other than that, this boss fight is a great reward after sifting through the hell that is Interloper for the most part. Overall, we can definitely say that Black Mesa was a success. Fun fact, it released just a few weeks before Half-Life Alyx released. With Half-Life Alyx giving us all the workshop tools for Source 2, it feels like it puts the final nail in the coffin for Source 1. Black Mesa Zen feels like the final form of Source 1. The absolute best it is able to achieve ever, both for gameplay and especially looks-wise. All its capacities were pushed to the limits. So in a way, the release of Black Mesa Zen was the perfect send-off for Source 1 to make way for Source 2. I would honestly say that even for a first-time playthrough, Black Mesa is a great alternative. Unless you care for video game history, I don't see a reason why you would play the original Half-Life 1 over this one. As a fan, I do obviously recommend as many people as possible to play the original Half-Life 1. But in case you can't be bothered with 90s graphics, give Black Mesa a shot instead. You get to experience the same level of gameplay and story with improved visuals. The only thing you will miss out on is the original Half-Life 1 soundtrack, which is a banger. Black Mesa's 1 is obviously great as well though. Black Mesa definitely achieved its goals. Crowbar Collective delivered a great piece of content and I can't wait to see what they'll do next. And even if Interloper is pretty flawed at times, the Zen chapters are still a massive and genuinely astounding achievement in gaming, and definitely a great way to send off the Source engine. Especially considering that they all simply did it for the love of the game. Oh shit, what's that?